Hello, salam alaikum, and welcome to April 7th edition of Florida's Social Lunch Hour, where we discuss topics of interest to the Florida Muslim community and hopefully to the Florida community at large. Today's topic is the aftermath of the Muslim ban, which ended like it began as the fulfillment of a campaign promise. I would like to think that part of the reasons Americans overwhelmingly voted for this new administration was that it had promised to start treating immigrants of all religious persuasions with dignity and respect that every human being deserves. And getting rid of a policy that was so obviously targeted at Muslims for exclusion was part of that promise. The ban, which was initially meant to last only 6 months to review the Obama administration's alleged lax pro-Muslim vetting procedures, would still be in place today if the administration had not changed. In setting the stage for this discussion, one should remember that the mistreatment of immigrants is something the rich and powerful have done from the inception of this country, and they carefully curated messages of fear of the other to get the population to go along. And there's no denying that still today, policymakers and elected officials have risen and continue to rise to power by stirring those exact fears against the other, the immigrant groups, the scary people, the rapists and murderers, to get popular support for their authoritarian policies and to present themselves as the solution of all of our problems, which are obviously caused by immigrants, evidently. Likewise, the Muslim ban did not come out of a vacuum, and anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim policies did not stop when it was repealed. But it was striking that an unconstitutional election promise to effect a total and complete shutdown of all Muslims entering the US actually became law, and then at the president's behest was made legal by including a couple of non-Muslim countries for show. The general anti-immigrant policies of the previous administration not only affected people trying to get into the United States, they affected all areas of immigration law, both inside and outside, and affected business travelers, family immigration, and anyone, investors as well. Because the administration created policies that threw wrenches in the normal adjudication process of every petition and application. Today we have an expert, two experts actually on this subject. Immigration attorney Robert Sikta is a graduate of the College of William and Mary and concentrates his practice primarily on asylum and family and citizenship law. He is the leader of CAIR Florida's immigration practice and has been with CAIR Florida for about 4.5 years. Also, I'd like to welcome CAIR Florida's Central Florida Regional Coordinator and recent law graduate, and as of yesterday, a passer of the bar, Ms. Laura Ganem, who has been involved in travel advisories and know your rights trainings aimed at Muslim travelers. She will share her knowledge about the ongoing difficulties of Muslim travelers even without the ban. Welcome, Bob and Lara.
Thank you, Norma. And
good afternoon, everybody.
So, Bob, why don't you get us started with the presentation today?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. We've got some slides we're going to show you as we take you through this. As you know, we pretend we had a Muslim ban. My take is broader. I'm always on pins and needles about this. We talk about first what it was. You all know it covered Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Yemen, and just for cover, certain Venezuelans and all North Koreans. That was the way it got past the Supreme Court. They pretended in that ruse, and everybody played along, that if we just made a ban that got outside predominantly Muslim countries, as they call them, then we could keep out Muslims as well, plus a few people we didn't like so much. Which means that it is gone for now because of a new administration. On the 20th of January, President Biden signed an executive order that got rid of the ban. You remember, this was a ban that was supposed to be around for 6 months, and please excuse my language here, but the language of the president at the time was, until we can figure out what the hell is going on, with the idea that within 6 months, this would be gone. It got hustled through the Supreme Court, and it was still with us until the day he left office 4 years later. But for now, it's gone. But it's important to understand what it did. First, it depended on your status. Everybody's got what we call status. Your status can be that of being a United States citizen. If you were a U.S. citizen, it didn't affect you much, but I'm going to speak in a moment about how it still might have. If you're a green card holder, you think it didn't affect you because theoretically, under the ban, green card holders were allowed to come back into the United States if they were outside the United States at the time the ban was put in place. But it didn't really work like that either. And then we have and had non-immigrant visa holders. These are everybody from students on F1 visas or business visitors on what we call B1s, tourist visitors on B2, J1 people who are professionals, others, and a mix of the dates their visas were granted and their application processes where they were at the time, which meant that they were put on hold or denied outright because they had applied or were in process at the time the ban was put in place. And then we had immigrant visa applicants, families, individuals trying to come here to reunite with their families. And I'm talking husbands and wives and children and parents and brothers and sisters, families that could not be reunited simply because of the border they were behind at the time and the fact that the ban was in place and was being enforced. So that's kind of what, from a very modest perspective, what it did. And then again, we say it's gone for now, but it's important when you look at all this to understand how this could happen, how it could be put in place, how it could be enforced. In other words, who was complicit in it? Well, the first complicit stuff we get relates to the next slide. And that complicit stuff involves different government agencies. We had the CBP. Those are the people you meet at the border. It's important to understand something about the CBP, Customs and Border Protection. You come through a line, you hand them your passport. Sometimes they look through your luggage, they ask you a few questions, and ordinarily you go on your way. But it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes they ask you more penetrating questions, and they even pull you aside, and you think these are innocent conversations. You even look at your passport and they've stamped it in some place, and you've got a whole bunch of blank pages in your passport, so everything's fine. You're comfortable and happy with it. But they've recorded all this, and they've recorded something called an I-94. Now, some of you know what an I-94 is, some of you don't. But an I-94 is an electronic record of your entering the country. It looks like a simple thing, but it's a record that the government keeps showing when you entered and how you entered and how long you were allowed to stay when you entered if you were not a U.S. citizen and not a green card holder. Well, when you've got those things in place and they start talking to you as you come through, and again, you think this is innocent, like, how was your trip? And are you bringing anything you shouldn't? And things like that. And you think that's all innocent, just regular conversation. But it's important to understand it isn't. All of this is on tape. All of this is recorded, and there is a record of you. So that comes into something I'm going to mention in a minute. But keep in mind, it's not just an innocent entry if you're not a U.S. citizen, and sometimes even if you are. Then behind that, we had other things. We still have other things. ICE is out there in other directions that actually come into this indirectly, not directly. The USCIS, where you process things, comes into play in this entire process because they're sort of an invisible wall. We've tried to build visible walls, these letters. The invisible walls are the more important ones that affect people, particularly who are Muslims. We dealt with all this through the auspices of some guy named Miller in order to, well, I won't even say that, something about some guy looking for campaign donations. But that's me. That's my opinion. That's not CAIR's opinion. So who did it hurt? Well, it didn't just hurt people who weren't allowed to come in. It hurt you. It hurt everybody. There are different ways it hurt everybody, no matter where you are. Let me give you some examples. 72% of people on what we call F1 visas are no longer here. Those are students. That means there's been a 72% brain drain on our country because people who were students couldn't come in here. If they left the country and tried to come back, they weren't being let back in. If they were applying to get a student visa, they couldn't get one and get back in. Why? Because they came from one of those listed countries. So that's a brain drain. the agencies that process these things had their staffs greatly reduced. You didn't see it because it was going on invisibly. For instance, the Tampa USCIS office, where a lot of processing gets done for you locally, is down to a 60% of their staff. In other words, 40% of the people who were there 4 years ago aren't there now. And they have to rebuild these staffs. And it's not a simple matter of just hiring a couple of people who look good and sound good with nice resumes. It involves training. It involves getting people through processes, vetting them so they can in turn vet other people. And that's a difficult process, takes time. So rebuilding that lost force of people becomes important. That money was spent in ways it shouldn't have been spent on those agencies. And I say that money because when you pay a filing fee, or one of your relatives in another country pays a filing fee to get something like a tourist visa or like a student visa, or they're going for a green card, or they're trying to process through a consulate, or any of those things, you pay filing fees for that. Those filing fees are what the government uses to run their agencies in this regard, particularly the USCIS. And when those funds are diverted, as they were these last 4 years, that is a problem too, because now you've got that money's been spent, it's gone, but you still need processing. Now you have to wait on your cash flow to resume to get strong enough again for these agencies even to be able to operate. The USCIS this last August, not just because of the pandemic, but because of the way they spent their filing fees, was literally looking at shutting down for a period of time and laying people off. So your money spent on filing fees was going in adverse ways that were actually indirectly affecting things like this and bolstering the Muslim ban.
Right, and
So,
actually, one of the things too is that they also required appointments on things that usually didn't require appointments. So they increased the volume of appointments and decreased the number of qualified officers to actually hear them. And that, of course, created long backlogs. But
exactly,
again, this is an effect of these anti-immigrant policies that hopefully we'll see reversed.
Exactly. And now think about it this way. Here's sort of a couple of war stories where we saw these things taking place. One was on the day the ban went into effect. I think it was January 27, 2017, when they tried the first ban before a court pushed it back for a while. And it took about a year and a half to get to the Supreme Court and go in place entirely. We had a couple that came in from Iraq, a married couple. Guy was a U.S. serviceman. She was an Iraqi. And they were supposed to be able to come in where she would then process for her green card here. They were stopped at the airport and were going to be turned around. Fortunately, a really prestigious law firm that really doesn't do much immigration law was at the airport. And they were outside what they ordinarily do, but they knew their presence would be important, and they knew their firm was prestigious. And they were standing there when people were coming through to the CBP and offering their services. And they convinced the CBP to let a couple in that they were going to put on a plane and send back to Iraq. We literally, if that hadn't happened, those people wouldn't be in the United States right now. So they were literally turning people around. On the other hand, we have had people who have been trying to process from Syria. We have family members here who have petitioned to bring their relatives over. They do this by filing something we call an I-130. It's a petition for an alien relative. And when that happens and the family member is in the other country, they have to do what's called consular processing. That means they have to be scheduled eventually after a bunch of paperwork to go to a U.S. consulate in another country. Now imagine you're in Syria. Well, the U.S. doesn't have a consulate in Syria, right? There's no embassy there right now either. So what do? Well, the nearest consulate and the designated consulate for them is in Amman, Jordan. Well, okay, you go to from Syria to Jordan. But that's no easy thing. First of all, it's not easy just to go from Syria to Jordan. But the consulate in Jordan, in Amman, created the following rule. By the way, it was a consulate that was understaffed and is still understaffed. They required that you come in on a specific flight and bring proof with you of having come on that flight, or they wouldn't even talk to you when you got to the consulate. Now, it's hard to get a flight out. It's hard to get a seat, period. There are certainly lots of people trying to get on those flights to get to the consulate. So this is a competitive process and it's an expensive process. you get eventually to the consulate in Amman after going through hurdles in Syria just to get out and get on that flight. And when you get there, they say, well, no, you didn't put this comma on your document, so you need to go back. Now, the past process for this was, here, let me put that comma in for you so we can process you. But as Norma was saying a few moments ago, that's not what they were doing. They were literally looking for ways to deny you. That meant you'd go back and forth 2 or 3 times. It would be terribly expensive, and they would essentially try to wear you out. That was part of it. Now, this started a practice that's going away under the Biden administration, but just imagine if this new administration hadn't come into place, this would be even worse today, and the ban would still be in place. But we're still feeling effects from it. It all depends on how you travel to the country, to the U.S., by land, sea, or air. Those things all make a difference. How you get here. We're going to talk about that just for a moment, and then we're going to take, and then Laura's going to tell you a few things that are really important. But think of it this way, in terms of looking to the. Go ahead, Laura. Do you have something?
Sorry. Can you actually tell
folks.
What's happening now with the Biden administration? What are their policies? What are the kinds of changes that you're seeing? And is there an actual reality based out of the promises that Biden made in his campaign?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're seeing a real turnaround in all kinds of things. The first way we've noticed it at CAIR is with processing times. Just in the last 3 weeks, we had applications of different kinds that we've been waiting on for over a year in some instances, and all of a sudden green cards and citizenship oath ceremonies showed up at our door for no reason other than they simply were holding them. The Biden administration has seen these things and is now processing them through. So they were literally not processing things. That was one piece of fallout that has changed now. And again, of course, the Muslim ban was lifted. But there are other things we're looking for in the way of change. They are restaffing. They are doing a project right now on this overall within the Biden administration that we're expecting results from within the next 30 to 60 days, perhaps as many as 90 days. It was supposed to be in place now, but it appears it's taking that much longer, about a new immigration bill. But that's going to require legislation. And that's not going to be easy if it can get done at all. In the meantime, we're looking for things that affect, for instance, the practice I do at CAIR. I do a lot of asylum. I don't know how many of you know, unless you've been through asylum, that when you get here and you file for asylum, you cannot get a work card that allows you to legally work in the United States for 1 year. How many of you can survive 1 year without being able to work? The Biden rule, we're hoping they'll go back to, I shouldn't call it the Biden rule. The rule before that was 6 months. And there were even sometimes ways around that. 6 months is a long time to wait, but they've lengthened it to a year. Why? To simply discourage people coming from places like Syria, which is an excellent worldwide example for processing. We still have TPS in place for these countries, thank goodness, and the windows continue to open for them. And when I say windows, that's a complicated thing to explain to you. But to get what's called TPS, temporary protected status, which is an excellent thing to get if you're from some of these countries and you're here, there's a whole process to that, but you can only do it when certain windows are open. And right now, the TPS window for Syria is open, and the TPS window for Venezuela is open. And we have clients, most of whom are Muslims, from those countries who we are trying to help. So however you come in this process becomes important. But let's talk about you directly for a second, those of you who are listening. Whether you're a citizen, whether you're a green carder, whether you're coming here on a particular visa to become an immigrant or as a non-immigrant to visit, it's really important to know certain things. How you travel is important, and what you carry is important. Coming in by land is easier, like coming across the Canadian border is easier, but coming across the Southwest border is almost impossible. We've had clients who came into the U.S. from Canada, had problems, came here for a vacation, and they were Canadian, had problems, and then they decided while they were in the U.S. to go to Mexico. And they had to come back in through Mexico as well and into the U.S. And we had to help them in both instances. It worked, but these were people who weren't even coming from what I call targeted countries like Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala and places like that. But they're still being threaded through the eye of a needle. When you come through, it's important to know what you bring with you. We tell all our clients, particularly anybody who has a green card or lower status, bring a clean phone. Get rid of your phone. Get rid of the social media on your phone. Bring a clean phone. They will try to look at your phone. Students have run into this in terrible ways. Students come in, they're young, they're peppy, they're innocent. They do all the things young students do of all ages. And they've got all kinds of social media on their phones. And friends send them things they don't solicit. But believe it or not, the CBP people find that stuff on their phones. And then they say, oh, you look like a terrorist to me, literally. And they send them back, and they are barred from the U.S. for 4 or 5 years. They can't even come back on their student visa until we get that fixed. And that's hard to fix because they didn't bring a clean phone. Always, please, bring a clean phone. And if it gets really crazy for you, and I shouldn't even say really crazy, if it looks like this is going to be strange, if it's not going well, this is where you keep calm and answer only the questions legitimately related to your travel. And you say, mind if I call my lawyer at CAIR Florida? We have a slide that comes after this where we kind of have some fun saying whom you call. Guest 1, mom. Guest 2, CAIR Florida. It's okay to call mom, but if they're only limiting you to one call, please call CAIR Florida. We will try and help with this process. And again, it's important how you behave. Do you remember when I mentioned earlier that they're recording everything when you come through the CBP check station, when they're stamping your passport? They've got it all on tape. So they've got it on tape if that CBP person is bullying you or baiting you. But they've also got it on tape if you yell at those people, if you get out of line yourself, if you get upset. That's why it's terribly important for you to stay calm. And when you get to that point where you think this isn't going well, I need some help outside myself, you want to very nicely say, I'd like to call my lawyer at CAIR Florida. Now, you're in what we call sort of a no man's land at this point, because there are rights that don't attach to you while you're in this spot where you haven't yet been admitted to the U.S. You're standing in the U.S., but you haven't been admitted yet. And until you're admitted to the U.S. by them stamping your passport, you aren't always entitled to things like a lawyer, but you do have the right to say nothing, to sit there and say nothing and say, I want to call my lawyer. So remember, clean phone, be nice, because you're nice people, but also because you're being watched. And there'll be a record of it that you can use in your favor later to show you were okay and they weren't, and be ready to call your lawyer. Well, there are all kinds of other things we could say. We don't know what kinds of questions you may have about this. We can do some more about this if you don't. But Laura, why don't you come in at this point and explain a few things as well?
Sure. Thanks, Bob. And that's very informative. And I really hope that everyone was paying very much attention to what he was saying about the changes that are happening after the Biden administration was sworn in. So I do want to just make mention and make sure that you're all aware that this didn't actually start with the Trump administration, nor is it ending with the Biden administration. This is something that we need to be cognizant of, as we need to be aware that this is happening to the Muslim community, even in informal ways. So we have this quote unquote Muslim ban, and we call it the Muslim ban specifically because President Trump, when he was campaigning, he specifically said he was going to ban Muslims. However, there is a formal name for it, and it did have that effect on the Muslim community. So there are informal ways, and bases are built around it. People are campaigning about ways of banning Muslims, but we need to also understand that there is another really impactful immigration issue happening to the Muslim community, which is the watch list. And many of you might actually be victims of this watch list. It is a policy, and it's having a major negative impact on the Muslim community, regardless of your immigration status. You could be a U.S. citizen, or you can be coming in on a visa. Muslims as young as toddlers are on this watch list and having difficulty traveling just due to their names being of Muslim origin. So what exactly would a toddler pose? What kind of threat do they pose to the U.S. government or the United States? Muslims are being stopped upon, entering the United States, as I mentioned, regardless of their status. They're pulled into secondary inspection. They're held for hours, often missing their flights. They're connecting flights. They're interrogated about their religious background, something that many of you might have experienced. They're interrogated about their religious background, all of these questions that have nothing to do with their travel. So what we need you to understand is that when you are being questioned, as Bob had mentioned, you need to stay calm and answer the questions, but you do have the right to refuse to answer questions regarding anything that's not related to your travel. So if they're not asking you where you're coming from, where you're going, how you got here, and questions like that, and they're asking you, we've had clients actually that have been asked, what sect of Islam are you? What mosque do you attend? Where did you learn Islam? Do you speak Arabic? These are questions that are irrelevant, and the CBP should not be asking you these questions regardless of your immigration status. We've actually had, as Bob had mentioned, we've had complaints that CBP is actually searching phones. This is something that it's known widely, and something that we're challenging at CAIR Florida and throughout our CAIR chapters, that the searching of phones should not be happening because it holds a lot of private information. But as Bob had mentioned, he is warning you all to clean your phones. But regardless of that, CBP has actually taken phones, searched them, and seized them, often held for months at a time before their return. And interestingly enough, all of this is done, yet there's no actual evidence that these procedures that they have at CBP have any effect in any way of stopping terrorism in the United States. We've had clients actually from the UK traveling here for humanitarian efforts, and the VIN numbers from their cell phones were recorded. What kind of effect does that have on their procedure? Why does that have anything to do with their travel? Bob had mentioned that students often are stopped as well because of their phones, and we've had actually a case where one of our students who goes to a very prestigious school in the United States, was traveling back from a research study through her school in a different country, and upon landing in Florida, she was stopped, and her visa was almost revoked and put on a ban for 5 years, just because there was a message in a WhatsApp group, a message that she didn't write, a message that she didn't respond to in a WhatsApp group that was a disturbing message. But because of someone else's conduct, she, as a Muslim traveler, was almost banned and her visa revoked. But alhamdulillah, at CAIR Florida, we were able to stop that. So I do just want to mention all of this because while there do need to be protections in place, the system that's being used is obviously flawed and targets Muslims. So we just need you to be aware of the policies out there, how they're being enforced, and also we internally and as well as a community, we need to really be educated and challenge Islamophobia in really whatever form it may come. And this is something that we hope that we can educate you on and help you through at CAIR Florida. So I will send it back to Norma, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob and Lara, for your comments. And I think, I know we're probably going to go over just a little bit because I don't know if we have questions from the audience or anyone that might. Please just type them in. And if they come on Facebook, please type them into the chat so that we can answer them. One of the things that I always thought, when the policies, and I remember one particular instance where people who had orders of deportation but who had humanitarian stays of deportation for years because they had families, and these are not necessarily Muslims. I mean, I remember one particular case with a gentleman here from Plant City who was Mexican, who had every year applied successfully for a stay of deportation because he had a large family to take care of. And as soon as the Trump administration came into power, the discretion was taken away from the officers to continue to give humanitarian relief. And I could just imagine that if I was one of those officers, and I think nobody joins the government to do harm to people. People mostly join to administer fairly and humanely. How I would have felt about doing my job, and then all those cuts that Bob's was talking about, how they would have affected also the working climate inside of the government agencies. So I want to thank all of the agents who stuck it out and continue to do their job within the agencies for their service and continued commitment to the proper administration of our laws. And I'm glad the directives have now turned away from gratuitous cruelty to humane administration of our immigration laws, because we are a nation of laws, and populism and fear should not dictate how a nation of our size and political stature administers to the weakest people in our society, and people who want to just, hug their mothers. I mean, the stories of families being separated, of mothers not being able to return to their children for years because of these administrative roadblocks that were gratuitously put up by the Trump administration, is hopefully ending. The lines are still long. COVID-19 has affected, obviously, the processing because offices are closed and staff is reduced. So, but at least we can all breathe a sigh of relief that at least the processing is going to resume to a hopefully fair procedure in time. So, do we have any questions from anyone?
I had a question actually for both of you as immigration experts. What are your predictions for the Biden administration based out of the promises that he had in his campaign? Do you see him actually working forward towards meeting these policies, or do you see another standstill happening?
Well, I think one needs to remember what the role of the president is. And the president has a lot of power with respect to things that are happening outside of the United States. That's, for example, that's why the Muslim ban was declared constitutional, is when he added those two countries. And because being able to keep people out of the United States is a tool, a constitutional tool that the executive has, the president has, in order to keep the country safe. And they didn't want to take that tool away from him. They didn't want to say, future presidents, you can no longer ban people from coming to the country. Of course, it is supposed to have a proper purpose, right? And one of the very interesting pieces of that decision was the concurring opinion by Justice Brennan, who basically said, yes, I agree, we shouldn't take that tool away. However, we should be able to rely on elected officials not breaking their oaths of office. So he knew the president was lying, he knew the administration was lying, but yet they did not want to take that tool away from the presidency. So I think under the Biden administration, we're going to see sanity and fairness, but still protecting America. I mean, nobody wants to leave America unprotected. So maybe, the tool is still there. And if there is some kind of a reason, a constitutional reason to use it, I imagine he's going to, use it if he has to. But within the United States, I think, and hopefully the climate is changing also to where the legislative branch is empowered to create immigration reform. And of course, that can be supported by the president and encouraged by the president as a matter of policy, but the actual change is going to have to come, hopefully, from Congress. Bob, did you want to chime in on that one?
A tough change. Yeah, that's going to be a change. Those are excellent remarks by Norma. That's really on point. From a more personal perspective, in terms of what we do on a daily basis, I can say that we are seeing things ease up. Now, remember, we have a president who's only been in office since the 20th of January. That's less than 3 months, and yet we're already seeing market changes just in processing. Things are moving faster. Things are moving the way they should. Well, I can tell you, having practiced law years ago in Appalachia, that I went to country courts where you never know whether the law that, as you knew it, was going to apply at all. And that's what we've been through the last 4 years. You walked in to a proceeding, whether it was an interview or citizenship interview or something involving an immigrant visa, something like that, and you did not know whether, no matter what the law, that was going to matter. But suddenly it matters again. Suddenly what we file matters again. The Trump administration imposed economic, I wouldn't call them sanctions, but obligations on processing that are suddenly gone. They were requiring the filing of different things related to qualifying to make sure you weren't going to be a public charge that are suddenly gone overnight. And that all by itself is easing a burden on people so they can go through their process, so they can file things and get them done. So by the same token, I'm always concerned that we make this, we skew bias in the direction that we've gone past, that we are not as open as we need to be, where people don't look like us or worship like what we think they worship like here. So this Muslim ban thing is a real scare for people. It's a great political tool if trying to throw red meat at somebody. And it clearly worked for the prior administration. It's still there. That stuff's still available. And we still need to round the corner on how we understand each other and being open to each other and helping each other, recognizing we're trying to help individuals. We're trying to help them get asylum. We're trying to help them get green cards and citizenship. We're trying to keep families together. We're trying to help this over here so families can reunite. And we're trying to travel back and forth openly. And that's still not all in place. The COVID has been an issue in this, but COVID over the last year was used as an excuse to stop people, not as the reason when you dug down into it and looked at why somebody was denied. So my biggest concern about that is when COVID's going a couple of years and we're sort of back to what we thought was normal a couple of years ago, or where we're out and socially around more, when something comes up that dates back to this time, we're going to have forgotten that COVID was going on. We're going to see it as a blip on the radar and not be as willing as we should to acknowledge during that time other things happened. And if that happens again, other underlying things can take place just like they did that can be used to harm human beings. We're here to help people. That's what CAIR does. And our mission was directly thwarted over the last 4 years, particularly over the last 12. But we're seeing a birth. It's the 20th of January. I'm just optimistic it's going to continue.
Yeah. One thing, let me add to what I said earlier. Obviously, the regulations and the internal rulemaking of the agencies within the Department of Homeland Security, that is a huge impact that an administration's philosophy and policy can have. It's just in the administration. The laws are going to stay the same until Congress does something, but the internal administration, the funding, the culture, and that we have seen a change and are very grateful for.
The culture. Yep. Absolutely.
All right. Well,
absolutely.
If we have no other questions, I would say thank you very much for
these portals that have been closed.
Sorry? There's a delay. I'm sorry, we're having technical issues, but hopefully we'll iron those out for the next program. But well, thank you very much, and congrats again, Lara, on passing the bar. We're all rooted for you, as you know. And thanks, Bob, for making the time. And hopefully we'll see you again next time. And bye-bye.
Wrap up with just a reminder for everybody that
thank you, Saba, too. Second.
Of course.
And our backstage hand, Sabha, of course, she's wonderful, mashallah. But tune in. We have our Ramadan special lunch hours happening starting next week, every Wednesday during Ramadan at 12 p.m. On April 21st, I actually am doing a program with academics on First Amendment exceptions when it comes to Palestine advocacy. So this is a conversation you will not want to miss. But till then, may you all have a blessed Ramadan. May Allah accept it all from us. And Jazakallah khairan for watching. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Bye-bye.